All right, everybody. Welcome to episode 2 of The Unfiltered Truth. My name is Eric Smith. I'm here with my co host, partner in crime, James Shook. And today we're going to talk about various subjects, one of them being why police officers don't just shoot people in the leg. But before that, kind of wanted to recap last week, talk about what we talked about a little bit and the progress that's been made. So, James, again, thanks for being back, man. And thanks for agreeing to co host with me.
Absolutely. It's looking forward to putting some more information out there.
Yeah, I am too, man. I think it went real good. We got some good information out there. And so one of the things we talked about was obviously police officers and police departments training in defensive tactics. And we did talk about how Kennesaw PD was going to come in and start training with you. So if you could just, tell the audience and everybody how that went, what they learned, and the things that you learned from that.
Yeah, so I learned a good bit from being able to interact with the Kennesaw PD guys. They came in extremely humble, willing to learn, and it was very beneficial for not only those guys, but it gave me a little bit of insight as to what law enforcement has trained up to this point, or what their and this was a grappling environment, so we'll say the capabilities of grappling were confidence level in grappling.
Sure.
Guys came in with a really open mind to it. They had got a really good understanding of just some basic principles of wrestling more than anything.
Yep.
And a couple of the basic takedowns we did in this particular session, I think, was something they'll be able to utilize possibly on a daily basis, or at least if they get into a situation where you have a resisting suspect. So, the things that I learned from it, I think it's going to help me teach in the future to them. Just being able to see, ask them questions about protocol. I think in the future, see how we can kind of blur those lines together where we start, maybe working across the edge, or the tiptoeing around the edge of what they've always been doing or what they've been taught to do versus some of the newer age and more modern stuff that we can teach them.
Outstanding. And the guys, from the feedback I got from them, they loved it and were super thankful they took the time. So obviously, thanks from the community and everybody for doing that. It's huge for our guys to get that kind of training. It makes everybody else safer, which is awesome. So one topic that we had one of our viewers asked about, and an actual friend of mine as well asked about, because they had this conversation with friends and coworkers, is why police officers, when a lethal force situation happens, or a situation where somebody may be armed with a knife or something that people may not view as dangerous as a gun, don't just shoot people in the leg. And they wanted us to talk about that, kind of break it down. So I kind of want to show everybody a video about one of our politicians. Again, we don't get into politics here, but this person said it, so we're going to let people view it and make their own assumptions about everything. And we'll show another video to kind of disprove this politician's whole theory. So let's go with this. All right. And there you go. All right, here we go.
And the idea that instead of standing there and teaching a cop who's an unarmed person coming at him with a knife or something, shooting him in the leg instead of in the heart, is a very different thing. There's a lot of different things that can change.
All right, so.
Whoa. Huh.
Yeah, so here's
start on that.
Well, I got a couple problems with that video. Number one, he says shooting an unarmed person with a knife. Well, if you have a knife, you're not unarmed.
Yeah, and you're pretty armed at that point, I believe.
Yeah, and as we're going to see in another video here in just a second, we're going to show what happens in these situations when somebody is armed with a knife. Again, we don't I see you, Gage. That's pretty funny. Good comment there, buddy. Biden 2020. Hey, man, you put the hashtags out there. We'll talk about them on the podcast for you, buddy.
Yeah, I just had to switch to my live comments here so I can see what these guys are writing.
Yeah, there you go. That's awesome. Thanks for that, Gage. So going back to what we're talking about, in a lethal force situation, or a situation when somebody's armed, it's not like the movies. I think a lot of times our politicians on both sides of the aisle will be the first one to say it. Typically will legislate laws and assume things and speak on things, talking about AR-14s or whatever it was, and all this other crazy stuff, and making laws based on what they see in movies. And a lot of people think when you shoot somebody in the leg that they're immediately going to fall down and the situation's over and it's taken care of and the threat's over. So with that, let's go to the next video. We'll break this down. Talk about, I've got it called up the point this happened here in Georgia. I've got it called up to the point where lethal force is used, and it's very important to note this subject was armed with a knife. It was deemed a good shoot by the GBI and all these other things. So we'll get right to it. So stop that screen share. All right, and here we go. And again, if people are squeamish or anything about that or blood, just go ahead and know that, this is a graphic video. Credit to police activity for this video, and here we go.
Hey, less lethal. Put the knife down, please. No. Put it on. Shots fired, visual shots fired. Put it on. Hands on your back. Hands behind your back. No. Get on the ground. Get on the ground. No. Get on the ground, man. Tase him. No. Oh, he's got it. Oh, God. He's right on God. Hey, you good? You good?
What a great shot there at the end.
Man, yeah, balls of steel on that one. There's no question. No question. Obviously not the way you want to see any situation turn out. But give me your thoughts on that video and what you think, and then we'll get into it some more.
That's an interesting one. So can we tie this back in with what Biden said earlier?
Oh, that's why we showed it. I mean, we just showed he wants people to shoot people in the legs when situations like that are unarmed with a knife, and clearly in this situation, that's exactly what we had.
I think this guy took at least 2, if not 3 rounds into his torso, correct?
Oh, yeah, he was hit multiple times.
Early on, the first few shots.
Correct.
Yeah, so wow, there's so much to digest in that video. I hate the way it ended with the officer allowing him to approach him that closely while he was struggling. I couldn't tell if he was struggling to get his sidearm back out, if he had reholstered.
I think he was. It looked like, I've seen the video shot in classes before, an unedited version, I believe, in that one. And somebody correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. He was trying to reholster his duty weapon. Again, I can't speak to why he was. Maybe because he was afraid the guy was going to close distance and get it. He felt like his holster was probably the safest place, or maybe he couldn't make a shot. With the way the subject closed distance, which is very important to note. That guy closed a ton of distance in a mere matter of seconds. And all of us know the old saying goes, action's faster than reaction. And that just shows you in a situation like that, they hit him in the torso. They hit him in the lethal spots. And who knows what kind of drugs that guy was on. I probably should have broken it down and seen what the toxicology report said. But just sheer adrenaline will get you a long ways. All of us know that.
Absolutely.
So go ahead, bud.
Whoa. So the guy, I mean, obviously is asking for what he got, I believe, in the end.
100%.
Whether or not he's on drugs, it's a super unfortunate situation that you have somebody, that's going to start in a situation that does not need to happen in the first place. Cops arrive on scene. He's got a knife. Now, I couldn't tell from the video, and I've looked at it a few times.
Sure.
I didn't go back and specifically check this out, but maybe does the knife is not in his hand when he makes the second attempt at the officer, correct?
I believe it is. Let me double check, because he sticks the knife to the officer's throat on the second one. Let's go back and break it down again. It's kind of hard to see in this one because they have it blurred out.
Okay.
Yeah, he's got in his right hand, he's got the knife.
Something hit the ground, looked like, in the video, and was left laying there. I just didn't know what that was after the first few shots.
Correct. But yeah, I believe the knife is still in his hands. I'm sitting here looking at it. It's hard to tell because it's edited out. But at the least, he is going for his gun the second time through.
Yeah. No, so definitely a good shoot.
Sure.
All the way around. That's one of those really great situations where your duty weapon is the kind of your last means when you're on foot like that.
Yep.
And when it proved to be not as effective as maybe he thought it should be. And I guess at that point you would be looking for cooperation from the guy if he did live through the deadly force.
Yep. Yeah, 100%. 100%. Since we shouted out Biden 2020, we got Kathy with a hashtag Trump 2020. So we got both sides of the fence going here today, which I'm just fine with.
Yeah, I'm suspect that one of those is a little
probably sarcasm.
But no, in that situation, I think that you know, the officers totally handled that situation correct. They gave him plenty of time to, you know, make a better decision for himself.
Sure.
And not only that, pleading with him. What do you really do when the guy's, you know, begging, kill me, kill me, kill me?
Right.
And you know, I know that's a sucky place to be too, because now you feel like the guy intentionally wanted you to do that, and you're about to have to oblige him of this, even though I'm sure the officers did not want to.
Well, and it's funny you segue right into that. So let's that'll help me jump into my next point or our next point. Something about that video we didn't show just for the sheer sake of time was there's about 2 minutes prior to that where the officers literally were backing down a driveway back down in the main road and literally negotiated with this guy for almost 2 minutes prior to the guy finally charging the police officers and getting shot and killed ultimately. And thank goodness none of the police were seriously injured in that. So let's talk about suicide by cop then.
Hey, can I ask a question real quick?
Sure.
Maybe you can answer this question. So I would assume most officers in these situations are, let's just say on a daily patrol car. Do these guys typically keep rifles, shotguns, anything like that in the car?
So it's gotten, as the years have gone on, the answer is yes. My old department, everybody was issued a Smith & Wesson M&P 15 we had a red dot on ours at the old department. But those didn't really get to be mandatory until the past like 2 years.
Okay.
And 2-3 years.
I don't see them come out in situations like this. And so I'm wondering, is it optics? Does it look really bad when the officer goes for an AR? Or
well, yeah, sometimes depending on who your command staff is in the public, we have had my old chief, not the one I worked for before. My old chief was great. The chief that I worked under last was a great guy. Chief before him was a good guy. He was just old school. And he was one of those guys, he did not like ARs. He did not like shotguns. He was a very big optics, PR, don't like the way things look. We had a bank robbery happen one day, and I brought out a shotgun, and he actually yelled at me for having the shotgun out, despite us knowing that the suspect was still in the bank at the time, just because it looked bad. So that's kind of a mindset thing that's being broken down these days. And it is becoming more commonplace for officers to have patrol rifles, but it's not an always thing. And again, that brings us right back to the point I was going to start talking about those shootings and what happens in them, because unfortunately, I can speak to what happens when you go through a shooting like that. When somebody is armed and you have to use lethal force, and kind of break down the parts of it I can. The case has been adjudicated, but there's still some reasons why I'm not going to bring up specifics of it. So here's what happens in situations like that. Number one, it's high stress. It's adrenaline. I don't know how many of these people that are saying this stuff to police officers, you know, just shoot them in the leg. Why can't you just shoot the gun out of their hand? Why can't you do all these other things? Well, number one, a pistol is not a weapon system that's made for that, which you just alluded to. Most times that's what you see police officers have in their hand is a sidearm or a pistol, semi-automatic pistol these days. A pistol in and of itself is a defensive weapon. It is not a weapon for offense. It's not a weapon to reach out and touch somebody. It's kind of a last resort, and that's the reason why you don't see soldiers in Afghanistan and places walking around with a Glock in their hand. They're typically walking around with an M16 of some kind. So as far as when it goes, what goes through your head in a shooting like that, everything breaks down and kind of goes to slow motion, and you just can't, like, you get an auditory exclusion. You can't really hear anything. Everything slows down, and it's just the most high stress situation that you can ever believe that you put yourself in. And the guy that I ultimately shot, he was trying to commit suicide by police, admitted to it in open court. He did live, thankfully. But what I can tell you is, even when you do shoot somebody in a lethal spot, he was shot clearly in the chest with the first shot that I hit him with. He fell down on the ground. He did not die. He lived. Like I said, again, thankfully, glad he's going to be okay. Hopefully he's getting his life right, and everything will be cool. But it's not like the movies. When you shoot somebody, as we just showed in this video, we have video proof, people just don't fall down. They just don't. And when it comes down to it, lethal force is lethal force. If you pull out a gun and shoot somebody, it's lethal force no matter how you break it down. You alluded to it offline. Unless we're going to redefine what lethal force is in Georgia, it makes zero sense. Thoughts? Yeah.
So if we're talking about shooting in the leg, we'll go back to the Biden video. So we want to shoot the guy in the leg, and anybody that's been to the range, unless you're a professional, unless this is what you do the majority of the time, you're going to have a hard time making a pinpointed shot, not just on a moving target, but on the more slender portions of a moving target.
Correct.
Shooting downward out of your normal line of sight. I don't see where, obviously, anyone who makes a ludicrous statement like that has no idea how guns work and has never, engaged a target, whether or not they've been target practice or they've went and shot or plinked or whatever, they've obviously never trained as if this would be a potential human situation where you're having to battle other humans. It's absolutely out of the realm of reasonable thought that you would ever try to shoot someone in the lower extremities. And it comes along with its own dangers as well. But I'm assuming if you're going to go ahead and make the shot, you're using deadly force anyways. You're looking for the kill.
Correct.
So
you're looking to
leg,
stop the threat, not necessarily kill them, but to disable the person to stop the threat. And no matter what, shooting somebody in the leg or the hand or something like that, most times that's not going to stop them. If they're motivated, as we saw in this video, they're going to get to you. They're going to try to do you harm, and then ultimately you're going to have to shoot them. It looks like that guy ended up getting shot in the head, and ultimately, the threat was stopped.
Well, we talked about this before we came on air.
Sure.
I think it was funny the way you pointed it out. All of a sudden, the public is going to allow us to. It's okay. Okay, so now we have to redefine what threat level does somebody have to be before we can shoot them in one of their extremities.
Yep.
And now we also have to define that if we're using that as an alternative to lethal force, then we have to, or deadly force, we have to redefine that now as not deadly force. So can we use that in the same situation we would use the taser? And the public's just going to be completely okay with that. They're going to want to see people getting shot in the extremities.
Absolutely.
Somebody mouths off to the police officer. He shoots him in the leg and tells him to shut up. It's
correct.
Silly. The public would never go for that. The optics is 10 times worse. And then you would have the shootings would be at an all-time high. There's no good that could ever come out of that statement. To be honest, it's so absolutely absurd. I can't believe anyone would say that.
Oh, it is. It's absurd for anybody to say it. And again, that's untrained, just ignorant people that say things like that. That just don't know. Some people have good intentions when they say it, and they just don't know any better, and that's fine. But there's a reason why you don't use a taser in a situation like that where somebody has a knife. Could you imagine, if that officer had used a taser or tried to use a taser, which the taser that they carried looked like the X26, which is a single shot taser. He's got one chance for both probes to connect and hope that it connects with that guy before the guy closes on him. And at that point, he would have gotten stabbed, cut, and Lord knows what would have happened to the police officer if he had tried to just use his taser instead of using deadly force, which was absolutely authorized there. There's no question of that. Yeah,
well, the understanding always has to be when you go into a knife fight that someone's going to get cut.
1,000%.
That's an absolute in any kind of knife fighting situation.
Yep. And just shared the window real quick. This is another reason why you just don't shoot people in the leg. If y'all look on the right of that diagram, it's just a diagram of the human legs and the veins and arteries that run through them. You have this giant artery in your thigh that's called your femoral artery in your inner thigh that if you shoot somebody in that, they're going to bleed out. It's lethal force. If you shoot somebody in the leg, you can see there's countless arteries and veins that run through your leg. That person has a chance of bleeding out. It's not going to stop them quickly to where you can render a mate either, because if you shoot somebody and they bleed out, it's going to take them a second, and it makes zero sense. I can't even really bring myself to words because it makes so little sense.
Yeah, very, very unpleasant way to have to deal with that scene after the fact as well.
Oh yeah, 100%. And so let's talk about, you kind of alluded to it under a stressful situation. I did a little experiment this weekend. You and I kind of talked about it offline. We practiced headshots at 25 yards, myself and one of my coworkers in the private sector. Luckily we have access to an indoor range with air conditioning, perfect lighting, all these things. And both of us are pretty well-trained shooters. As I said before, I've been on SWAT, done all these things before. And we took our time at 25 yards trying to do a headshot, which if you look at someone's head and you look at their thigh, they're going to be similar sizes for the most part. So you're talking about aiming at a small portion of the body with zero stress, with all the time in the world that you want. Me being what I think is a very good shooter, I typically shoot in the high 90 percentiles on the qualification course for law enforcement, and at work we happen to shoot the same one. Now I'm very high end as far as those go. I only managed to hit my target 2 out of 12 times from 25 yards. Brought it in another 10 yards to 15. I believe I hit it 8 out of 12. And then once I got into 7 yards, I was 12 out of 12. But something to allude to on that is, 1, it was with a pistol. 2, it was zero stress, perfect lighting, no wind, everything, all the conditions were perfect. It's just not practical, point blank, period, to shoot somebody in the leg or try to shoot somebody in the extremity. A pistol is not a sniper rifle. We can talk about weapon systems here in a minute and their applications, but a pistol is not made for that, period.
Well, part of it's the safety factor whether you're looking at it from a law enforcement point of view or the public's point of view, the safety factor as to why you're not allowed to just pull your gun and shoot people all the time for anything that they do is because deadly force has to be warranted. That's the only reason we would be pulling the gun to shoot them.
Correct.
So if we're saying now we're going to redefine, so there's some kind of range in between where there's deadly force and then there's this what some people would like to call a less deadly force. Maybe we shoot them in the extremity. Obviously, I can't even finish that sentence because it's not going to work out.
It makes zero sense. And asking these officers to make these decisions under high stress situations, it just doesn't make any sense to anybody that's got any kind of reason. And it's not going to turn out good for anybody involved. The officers are going to get hurt. The public's going to be in danger. And it just doesn't make sense. Because, either way you look at it, deadly force is deadly force, period. If you're going to use deadly force on somebody, you need to use deadly force, as unfortunate as it is, and then deal with the situation. But you can't run around and shoot people in the leg despite what our politicians tell us we should be doing.
I would be suspect of the outrage you would have shooting someone supposedly not deadly force in an extremity or in the leg, should that ever come to pass, and then the person dies. What kind of outrage are we going to have then?
Right, exactly. Well, they're like, yeah, exactly. Well, I shot him in the leg like they said for me to do, and then suddenly the person bleeds out on the side of the road because you blew their femoral artery into pieces and you didn't have a tourniquet on you to deal with it. Yeah, it's a problem. It's a huge problem. Something I kind of wanted to hit on for experience for me is kind of getting back into the training thing of police officers and how they do train on firearms. Most departments, Post only requires use Peace Officers Standards Training Council. They're the people that oversee the police officers in the state, and their certifications only require you to qualify one time a year. Their course of fire, which police departments can make it more difficult but not easy, their course of fire only goes out to 25 yards. Police officers are not trained to snipe, be snipers with pistols, because there's a reason why you only shoot 4 of your 30 rounds from the 25-yard line, just because it doesn't happen often. My case with my shooting happened to be a vast exception to the rule. I believe the shot was 31 to 33 yards was the shot that the GBI said, the distance I was from my suspect. There was reasons for that. The conditions were kind of, I guess, good for me in that situation. But most law enforcement engagements are going to be 3 yards and in, basically face to face, kind of like I talked about last week with hands on. You're going to be right there on top of somebody. Police officers aren't trained to do that. There's no way to train it to do it. I have never been to a police range where there's been moving targets. I've never seen a police target that had legs on it that I can think of. It makes zero sense, and it's mind blowing to me. And I think a lot of these politicians and news media and these people that are putting things out to these people, to the public, that don't know any better either, just because they haven't been through it. They need to go through some kind of training and be responsible before they start saying things like that.
Yeah, I watched I think it was on YouTube. It was a video. Someone that I follow on there is an ex-CIA operator, and I think Navy SEAL as well. And he spoke to the extreme difficulty of the pistol program to become a CIA operator, and that it was almost way overboard as to the requirement for it.
Yep.
That would actually cause very qualified people to not be able to make it into those programs or to become operators with the CIA and work overseas or within the country as well. And even with those, he had spoke of, even with those kind of requirements, they would never take extremity shots. It's always still center mass everything. I mean, it's just the way it's taught,
Sure.
And it's the way it's always going to be, because you don't have any guarantees already, and you're going to greatly reduce your opportunity of impact or a sufficient impact to stop the suspect.
Right. Well, the whole point,
extremities.
Right. The whole point of using lethal force is to stop the threat as quickly and as safely as possible. And that's why we say train to stop the threat, not shoot to kill necessarily, because sometimes, again, in my situation, thankfully, the gentleman that I had to shoot was shot in the chest and he dropped, and that was the end of it that day. But not all situations go that way. Again, adrenaline's a big thing. Drugs are a big thing. As we've seen in a lot of these shootings, the suspects, many times are high on drugs of some kind. If you look at, the research on active shooters and these guys that go into schools and the buildings, they're hopped up on, psychotropic medication and all these other things, and their mind's not right in the first place. So it's easy to say somebody like me or you that when you don't expect it, if you get shot in the leg, you'd be disabled. Okay, sure, maybe because you're not expecting it. But if you're already hopped up on meds, hopped up on drugs, hopped up on all this stuff, and you get in a situation like that and you get to the point where you get shot, you're not just going to fall down and give up. It doesn't happen often.
Yeah.
It just doesn't.
Well, people watch the movies too much. I think that's where a lot of this comes from. You watch the movies, the guy gets a gunshot, he immediately falls, usually instant death. By the time he hits the floor, there's no movement, there's no breathing anymore, which we both know is extremely unrealistic. In the actual situation, it's probably a lot more graphic and a lot more than most people would ever care to actually see.
It is.
Or to be confronted with. So movies, Hollywood obviously definitely, we'll say definitely has a lot to do, I think, with the perception people have of how you could utilize a firearm. I think there's a handful of movies out there that I've even seen where they do shoot extremities and are extremely accurate and very precise. And if anyone that wants to make that argument from that standpoint, my response back to them would be, well, it's Hollywood, so it's completely.
Well, and it's funny you say that because, you know, again, I go back to my shooting with mine. When I shot the guy and he fell and, you know, went up there and effected the arrest and did what we did, I removed myself from the scene as other officers eventually were rendering aid to him and other things. I removed myself from the scene, never saw the guy again from the second the handcuffs went on. I immediately, you know, did what I was trained to do and took myself out of the situation. Well, when we got back to the police department, and this whole time I thought he was dead because he never made a sound after we handcuffed him. In my head, I was like, I just shot and killed somebody. Oh my God, you know, what's going to happen? The trauma and just everything you're thinking, like, you know, am I going to go to prison? What's going to happen to me? You know, you're right, but you're still doubting all these things. Well, anyways, we get back to the police department and they're like, yeah, the suspect's at the hospital, this, that, and other. And, you know, he's talking and walking. And I was like, what? I was like, no, he's dead. And my fellow officer's like, no, Eric, he's alive. And I was like, no, I shot him in the chest. I saw where I hit him. Like, it was a kill shot. Like, he's dead. Like, he's dead, right? And they're like, no, he's fine. And again, praise God, the guy's okay. I'm glad he is. Sincerely, I'm glad he's fine. But it just goes to show you it's not the movies. Just because you shoot somebody in the chest doesn't mean they're going to fall. We just showed everybody when we opened up the podcast today with a video from South Georgia. You can shoot them multiple times in the chest. If they're motivated and they want to die or they're high on drugs, bad things are going to happen, man.
Yeah, there's a training video, I think maybe still passed around law enforcement, of the Georgia State Patrol officer that got gunned down by the older gentleman, the Vietnam vet or whatnot.
Yeah, that was Lawrence County. Yeah, that was Cardine
or something like that.
Yeah, it was
allowed him.
It was an officer. Yes.
Yeah, the Dinkler case. That's right. And that I watched that many different times as for training purposes, and that's a difficult video to watch.
It's horrible.
However, and I hate to have to use this as an example, but I think the officer was struck 17, 20 something times.
It was a lot. It was multiple, yes.
And was still alive all the way to the point where eventually the guy, I think, shot him in the head.
Yeah, he did. He eventually walked around the vehicle and executed him. And if anybody wants to search that video, it's one of those ones I don't watch anymore because I get all kinds of, you know, in my feelings about it for obvious reasons. But the officer was alive and took multiple rounds from an assault rifle and was still living and breathing. And you could hear him actually on the video gurgling, all those other things, till he eventually was executed by the offender. Well,
and I also believe that as in this, just after the reload, because the suspect did reload the weapon one time at the front of the vehicle. Just after the reload, he turns the corner, and from around, I think he shoots the officer a couple of times. He goes to the ground. He returns fire, and he hits the guy a couple of times in the stomach.
Yep.
And those are usually really bad shots too. The abdominal area is going to be a really bad place to get shot.
Yep.
For many reasons. And not only did the guy end up living, he was able to get away and wasn't found for hours later in a shack somewhere on the back of somebody's property.
Yeah, that's correct. I believe they found him with thermal imaging.
He was taken to the hospital. I mean, this was hours went by.
Correct.
And then they took him to the hospital and he still lived. So it just goes to show that you're not just dying because you got shot.
No.
And if you're in the heat of the moment, I think some people would die immediately when they got shot just because of the disbelief of what happened. And they would think, they would shut their body down because they've always seen, I'm supposed to die now when I get shot.
There's actually documented cases of police officers, unfortunately, succumbing to non-lethal wounds. There's one, I cannot remember the case right now. I'll try to find it posted on our website. An officer was shot in the arm. It was a non-lethal wound. And it was just one of those things where I just think the shock factor took over. And like you said, they were trained to think they're supposed to die when they got shot, and they did pass away. So yeah, it can go both ways. But again, when you're on meds and you're out of your mind, you're motivated and want to do harm to somebody or do harm to yourself, you're going to do what you have to do. Kind of want to hit on something, and since it's sitting behind you anyways, and you asked a question about it, of why more police officers don't have AR-15s. Me that day, the reason why I didn't have one, I happened to have mine in my office. I was a sergeant then, and I had it in my office and was cleaning it, which is literally the only reason I didn't have it in my patrol car. I left it to go to lunch, and came back. And after that, after I went to lunch and came back, I didn't have it with me, so I didn't have the gun, and then that was that. And let's talk about just kind of hop on the whole defund the police thing and why people are so concerned about officers getting military equipment.
Okay.
Well, for one, an AR does not stand for assault rifle. It does not stand for automatic rifle. It stands for Armalite rifle. That is the company that made the first rifles, and that was the model number that happened to come with it. An AR-15, which police officers are issued, the ones we carried were semi-automatic rifles. Any citizen that can lawfully obtain one because they're not a felon and goes through the process can get one. It's not a military weapon. It's not issued to the military. The military is issued M16s and other weapons that are automatic in different platforms for different reasons. So the idea that people are trying to defund the police and take away military equipment and all this other stuff from police, to me, is mind-blowing, because as you alluded to earlier in the podcast, it's so much safer for our guys to have these weapons because of the capabilities that they have, and actually make concentrated, controlled shots to end threats much quicker. And let's talk about the one behind you. Obviously, for you to shoot a round out of that gun, you have to pull the trigger, correct? You can't just hold it down and it just dump rounds out.
One trigger pull, one bullet downrange.
Semi-automatic. And weapon system you have got a red dot on it. From looks like I've got a very similar one myself. You're not shooting people from 300-400 yards away with them. It's made for 100 yards in, 50 yards in, is which that's at least where I'm comfortable with it. Some other people may be much more comfortable, and that's fine. But again, just because you have that gun doesn't mean that the threat's going to be over with and done with if you shoot somebody with it. It's just like anybody else or anything else. I have actually hunted deer with an AR-15, and I'm not equating a human to an animal, but just hear me on this. I've made a kill shot on a deer, shot them through both lungs with a rifle, and the deer hauled butt and ran off 200, 250 yards because of an adrenaline dump. Humans, we're mammals just like deer are. We have adrenaline just like deer do, and it does crazy things to your mind, and people have to understand that just because you shoot somebody with a gun doesn't mean they're going to die.
Absolutely. Well, let's look. So speaking of the rifles here, like this one that's similar to what I have behind me here, ballistics of these things, longer barrels.
Yep.
Are gonna reach greater velocity.
Yep.
They're going to be much more precise with a longer barrel. It really has less to do with the look of it. I know that seems to be a big thing in the media. They say they're scary looking, or to me, I just think soft people say stuff like that.
I mean, yeah, agreed.
Here, I'm a huge gun supporter, but having a longer barrel is necessary on these weapons so that we can make more surgical or strategic, you would say, more precise shots at
Correct.
longer distance, which creates safety. And I know in law enforcement, they talk about distance, between you and your suspect.
Yep.
These are the ultimate way to keep distance, be extremely accurate, be very confident with the weapon. Again, they're semi-automatic. I think most law enforcement agencies still use semi-automatic as well. I think very few of them are riding around with M4s or anything that's automatic or burst guns. So
very few.
But these are a great weapon. Now, if you want to look at it at its core, it's a very high velocity 22, projectile, and very in certain ways very similar to what a lot of people even buy for their kids.
Correct.
Start them out with guns. Being like a 22 LR is obviously different than a 223 Remington or a 5.56.
Correct.
However, extending the barrel, I guess, makes it look scarier.
Yep.
To some people, but what it does is it provides so much of a greater, I think, a a more positive result if law enforcement could actually use these more often in these situations, especially when they have time to actually go to something like that.
Correct.
I know we don't want officers completely walking around on the daily with a rifle slung over their shoulder so that they can constantly carry a patrol weapon the way you would in the military.
Correct.
The optics on that probably don't look good. But at the end of the day, if people don't get away from optics and get away from political correctness, they're never going to solve any of these issues. And if the issue right now is that these guns are scary, so we don't want you to use them because they look scary, we just feel like they're scary with no backup or no data to say anything to support that. If we're going to listen to those people make legislation, at some point in time, we're going to have to get a little less politically correct.
Yep.
We're going to have to start looking at what actually is effective, what saves lives, what helps us maintain protocol in these engagements.
Yep.
And to me, I think rifles are the ultimate way to go. And I know a lot of people will say if you had a home defense weapon, a shotgun would be your kind of primary all-around home defense weapon. And I'm still going to argue with that and say that if someone has a rifle similar to what I have behind me in that AR platform, I think hands down that's going to be the number one weapon you need for home defense.
Oh, I'm with you 100%. I keep an AR and a shotgun by my bed, so I guess, depending on the day, is which one I'm going to grab.
Absolutely.
So to hit on kind of that, we're talking about the military stuff, and this is facts, and this is what I'm big on giving to people. So this whole idea that you have certain people in a certain movement wanting to take military equipment away from police. Well, the military equipment that's issued to police isn't tanks. It's not these things. I would challenge anybody to show me a picture. I'm talking, show me a real picture, verified real, of a police department with a tank. A tank has a turret on it that can blow things up and shoot rounds out of it. Now, armored, personnel carriers, sure they
have a light armored personnel carrier, like you just mentioned, and people just call them tanks.
Correct, because they're like, again, it's ignorance. They're like, oh, well, it's got tracks on it or this, that, the other, so it's a tank. Well, no, it's not a tank. It doesn't have a mounted gun on it. It doesn't have a turret. It's not going to blow buildings up or any of these things. It's to get guys in and out of situations safely. And a lot of the military equipment that the politicians are wanting to take away from police, and I think a lot of people that don't really understand it and that are always screaming the militarization of the police, is body armor, ballistic helmets, riot gear. A lot of that stuff that police departments get is military surplus, the stuff that keeps them safe and heck keeps the public safe at this point, to get them in a situation. So it's important for people to understand that, again, comment on our page. If you can find a picture of a police department with a no BS tank, please post it and show me, and I'll say I'm wrong. But the military equipment we were issued, it was old school helmets. And back in the day when I first started at my old police department, we did have some ARs that were issued to us that were old school. I guess technically they're M16s, but they had a block in it to where we couldn't turn them to full auto or burst. It was just semi-automatic. So at that point, it's the same thing as a civilian AR-15. Okay. And it was the old A1 with the fixed sights and that stuff. But anyways, us taking away that equipment from the guys on the still serving on the streets, it's dumb. It's ignorant. It's as ignorant as saying to shoot somebody in the leg. And I think it's a lot of those people that just don't want the police to be properly equipped. And I think it's just people not knowing the difference between a true machine gun and what you have behind you, which is not a machine gun, and knowing the difference between an armored personnel carrier and a freaking tank. There's such a difference. Go ahead.
I had a conversation recently with several different people, actually. I've spoken with like 3 different people recently, and some of these topics came up many times when they were asking us about our previous podcast.
Yep.
And someone posed a question to me the other day about, or at least they made this statement, that when officers show up on the scene, let's say we got a guy in a house, a hostage situation, or maybe he's with a family member, he's trying to do harm to himself, and that a lot of times gets reported as a hostage situation.
Sure.
And police response that comes to the scene seems to be overwhelming.
Right.
Or we have officers in and just an ungodly, abnormal amount of gear that are walking on these scenes. I'm going to tell you right now, I just bought a new, as a matter of fact, I just picked up a new plate carrier and some stuff over this last week. I'm not going to a scene where there could potentially be any shots fired, or me not knowing, and there is the possibility there could be shots fired, without the most, I owe that to myself.
Sure.
to put on as much armor as I can possibly put on to potentially protect myself walking into these things. Anyone that says otherwise is just ignorant, is even the word for it. Anyone that says otherwise is looking at everything through an extremely narrow view and
Correct.
has no idea how ballistics work, how gunshots work, how protecting yourself in armor works. I mean, look how many military military combatants we have killed every year, and they're wearing as much armor as possible to try to protect them. And it's, anyone that wants to argue about it has a military look to it. What is a military look? And if there is a military look, why is it a bad thing?
Correct. And something that gets to hit on that, I'm glad you brought it up. It gives us another thing to talk about real quick. So body armor that police officers are issued to carry day in and day out, those are made to stop pistol rounds. There's a couple trauma plates you can get to put in the vest that'll stop some rifle rounds, very, very few rifle rounds. But the vest that I used to wear every day, day in and day out, is not made to stop a rifle round. That's why you have those plate carriers that a lot of officers are being issued now. And so most of them are picking them up on their own money.
Yeah.
In case there's a situation like an active shooter that comes up where they can, put the plate carrier on and go and have some sort of protection. Police body armor that they're issued just stops pistol rounds. And even then, you're not completely out of danger when that happens. I have a good friend of mine, Danny Rogers, that I know watches the podcast. He's been shot, and hopefully he'll let me share his pictures of where he got shot in the vest and the trauma plate. And you should have seen the bruise that was left on him. He's lucky he didn't die from the compression from the bullet. So our guys being issued the military style of body armor, it's hugely important, and it's a safety thing for them. People, I think, get scared. Everybody's biggest fear, I think on both sides of the fence that are saying this, is they don't want a government that's going to take over and, military in the streets, tanks in the streets, body armor, and martial law. None of us want that. Well, most of us don't. And
that's why we don't have one centralized law enforcement too.
Correct. And as far as the question, I guess, that was posed to you, of why, there's such this overwhelming presence on a barricaded gunman situation. Hell, my first night as a sergeant by myself, we had a barricaded gunman. Well, we thought it was initially. It wasn't in the end. But the reason why you have that presence there is to basically, this officer presence is the first level in the use of force continuum, where you're trying to get the person or suspect or the person that's having issues to give up before any force is used. Because to me, if I'm a normal person, or even a person that's maybe a little out of my mind, if I see a Bearcat, which is the vehicles that you see a lot of SWAT teams have now, sitting out in front of my house, and a bunch of guys in SWAT gear and rifles and all these other things, I'm gonna be like, man, I probably don't want to try anything today, because I'm gonna die if I do something stupid. Yeah. I'm not leaving out of this. But if I see one person or one police officer in soft body armor and just a regular Class A uniform, would I be more likely to try something, or would a suspect be? Absolutely, because your odds are better. I've had a suspect tell me before the only reason they didn't pull a gun on me on a traffic stop is because I happened to be training somebody, and there was two of us, and they knew there was no way that he could win a shootout. That's officer presence right there. So that's why we do it, and that's why we don't just bring the Bearcat out to the scene, and SWAT teams don't just bring it out to the scene and start ramming the house down and throwing gas. There's negotiations that go on. There's trained hostage negotiators at almost every police department, sheriff's office, trooper post, or anything these days, that they're going to give the person all kinds of time to come out and give up without any force being used. Whether they do or not, it's on them.
Absolutely. And going back to what I said earlier about and that all ties right in with what you just said. If the hesitation on public acceptance is it looks military style, it's okay. So the more militarized they are, the more it starts looking like the military's taking over our local streets and whatnot. These people are still operated under elected officials in many cases when you look into the sheriff's department, things like that.
Yep.
So that is the safety barrier that you have. Now, you do have to have a certain amount of trust in your community, but this is even more of a reason why, and we'll try to stay off of politics as much as we can, but this is even more of a reason why we don't want a federalized law enforcement system.
No, you do not. No. Yeah, because it's one of those things.
However, the caveat to that would be, we still need officers to have the latest, most modern, up-to-date protective gear, and they do need to show us a force when they come out to a scene. One of the biggest things that I think happens nowadays with law enforcement, or people viewing law enforcement in certain ways, there's no respect for authority anymore anywhere.
No.
Parents are not teaching their kids respect for law enforcement. I used to be scared to death when there was an encounter came up with a law enforcement officer, especially when I was younger. Yeah,
Right.
I just didn't want that at all. There's no way I would smart off to a law enforcement officer or especially unprovoked, just proactively. People go up and put their hands on them now, shove them around, vandalize their car while they're sitting in. I mean, it's back in the day, I would have been so scared of that. I would have thought that the guy would have actually had the right to kill me for that. And I always knew that was a hands-off situation. You don't mess with law enforcement. You definitely don't try to take stuff off their belt.
No.
And this leads us into, stuff that we spoke of last week. We don't need to get into, I guess, all that again. But it was just a clear understanding with me growing up that law enforcement officers were authoritative figures, and they needed to be respected, just as, no one respects elders anymore.
No.
And most of this is a breakdown within the home. I think that it's reinforced with the media. And I'm sure we have 3 or 4 more 10-hour podcasts we could do on those. So those topics.
Absolutely. And I had one of our other listeners, one of my good friends, Derek. He was listening to the podcast, and he brought up, he and I have a lot of different views, which is part of the reason why I like talking to Derek. He's a great guy, good family man. We happen to see a lot of different things. He's like, well, man, you're really pro-police on your podcast. Well, let me clarify something. I'm pro-police. Yes, 100%. I was one for 20 years. I'm pro-good police. Okay. Which is 99.999% of cops. It is, at least the ones I worked with. So again, I'm speaking the fact of what I know personally, and the guys that I've encountered, 99.9% of them were good guys. So yeah, I'm going to be pro-police when I think they're right. And if we see something on here, there's videos that I plan on bringing up down the road a little bit that are, some of them are a little disheartening, and, stuff we can break down, talk about for the public too. But like I said, I think I said last podcast, the biggest thing good cops hate is bad cops. Okay. I have seen countless officers turn people in when they're doing stuff, say things to them, go to superiors. As a sergeant, I had police officers that would come to me and about issues that they had going on with other police officers, and they had concerns, and I would address them every time. So with that said, yeah, I'm pro-police, but I'm pro-good police. So I just want to hit that, and again, thank Derek for watching and listening to his support. So go ahead.
Yeah, I would have to say I'm extremely pro law enforcement, and I don't think that's a bad thing. It's just like it would be like the opposing group saying that they're for what they're for, and yep. I'm saying that you shouldn't be like that because there's a few bad apples in your group.
100%.
So no, I'm completely pro law enforcement. I'm a statistical kind of person as well, so the numbers have to match up to what's going on. I don't think we have a massive problem with an overwhelming majority of cops being bad people. Of course, you're going to have your few bad apples, and they obviously need to be weeded out of these systems.
100%.
However, having said that, you can't overlook the 99+% of officers that are out there doing their job. They're doing it for a very low pay. It's a job a lot of people don't want to do. It's a job most people wouldn't do.
Oh, I've had countless,
for many reasons.
Countless friends.
I think they just need a little more respect overall. I think if we could get back to teaching our kids, even teachers at school teaching their students that, bringing law enforcement officers back into the classrooms, explaining to them what they do. We used to have that at our school. We had career days, and the majority of the time it was firemen and police officers that came in for these career days. And they would explain their job to us. It's a very dangerous job, and they deserve a higher level of respect, definitely, than what they get. I think they deserve a higher level of respect than just your average citizen walking around, to be honest with you.
Yeah, 100%. Sorry, I was trying to check the questions. Yeah, I agree, 100%. Kind of lost the point I was going to say. But yes, you're right. There's a respect's been taken out of law enforcement. That's a big thing. And I think, growing up, I grew up in Cobb County, Georgia, and back then, it was what it was. It was a ritzy area, whatever you want to call it back then. But we all knew better. Like, if you messed with Cobb County PD, white, black, purple, pink, Asian, male, female, Democrat, Republican, it did not matter. If you messed with them or you ran from them or you did something stupid, you were going to pay the consequences. And that's a lot of what kept me straight as a kid. I wasn't perfect by any stretch, but that's a lot of what kept me straight was the mutual respect / fear I had for law enforcement, because I knew there was consequences to my actions. And I think that's been kind of taken out, like you said, and this leads me to the point I was about to make, is let's take Seattle, for example. Again, not getting political, just stating facts. A portion of people took over a portion of Seattle, took over a police station. It was allowed by the chief and allowed by the mayor. That's fact. Okay. People were shot. There was crime that happened, all these other things that happened. And then this group of protesters leaves and goes and marches on the mayor's house last night or night before last. And then miraculously today, this morning, guess what happens? That whole zone's taken apart, and now suddenly they're dangerous protesters. And there's people arrested and people that dispersed, and it's because the respect.
It actually hit at home.
Yeah, well, yeah. Now the mayor's like, whoa! It's cool. Your business is in your house, but my house, I don't know about all that. We can't do that. And that's what the police officers do, is they stop that from happening. Again, all for peaceful protest, all for the First Amendment. That's great. Taking over zones of a city, not cool. Can't do that. That's causes problems. So they can ruin businesses, and you as a business owner, I'm sure, can appreciate that.
Well, I know we're off topic a little bit from what we started with, but we had somewhat of a game plan for it, and I think the rest of it, we're just going to kind of let it go. I look at a lot of these cases, and I see you can't neglect someone's record. So I'll give you an example. Say that I get in trouble with law enforcement, and there's consequences that come from that. Maybe you go to court, you get sentenced to jail, or you get sentenced to community service. It could be something light. It could be something major, right?
Yep.
That's a learning opportunity.
Oh, yeah.
If you're not learning anything from that,
100%.
if you're not finding it in yourself that you want to make sure you keep yourself out of those situations, even if you're still doing some of the dumb stuff that you do.
Yep.
You want to be at least a little more careful so you don't get law enforcement involved in it and have those consequences. Now, someone that's okay with repeating these consequences over and over and over does show a pattern in their life.
Correct. They're not a normal person by any stretch.
If you can go to jail for any amount of time, being locked in a cage away from everyone else, away from your social structure and what you know is civilization, and then you get released, and the first thing you do is commit more crime and go back, there's something wrong with you.
Yep, and that's not an easy thing to say, but it's correct.
And so until that becomes, I think, a point of discussion where people can look at that realistically, not a lot's going to get better. You're still going to have all the situations that we've been talking about are still going to keep arising. Yep. And I hate to say it, it's the inexperienced people in these situations that are getting their way and able to push policy and push legislation into these areas where they do not have the expertise for it. And the experts that actually do come out and speak on it are then demonized.
Yep.
And that leads to massive problems. And it goes back to what you were talking about with this weapon behind me. I don't think it's scary looking.
No, it's actually pretty.
I think they're beautiful, actually.
Absolutely. They're fun to shoot.
But if that's scary looking to someone, it's because they've been told by someone else that it's supposed to be scary looking. I don't think you inherently look at that and go, wow, that's really scary. I think you were told that by someone. And it's really going to get back down to, we got to get back down to having some kind of moral values being taught.
1,000%. 1,000%. And that's, funny you say that about the AR. That's, I think, my oldest son, I think the first gun I had him shoot was actually one of my AR-15s, just because they're so low recoil, so easy to shoot. Yeah. They're almost like shooting a toy. I mean, when you shoot them, because they don't recoil. And a lot of people think the projectiles that come out of ARs are like this big. The projectile, a 223/5.56 projectile, is literally what comes out of the casing and out of the barrel is that big. Okay, it's tiny. I mean, some of them get a little bit longer depending on the grain of the bullet and what style of bullet it is. But for all intents and purposes, they're very small. They just have a bigger powder charge behind them. And anyways, we get into that for later times. I guess since we're about to hit the hour mark, I want to start talking about some upcoming podcast guests we're going to have on and kind of go from there with it. And so July 22nd, we have Lance LaRusso coming on the podcast. He is one of the attorneys for Officer Garrett Rolfe. That is accused of all the things he's accused of for shooting for Rayshard Brooks. He'll be on July 22nd. We're working on hopefully getting Robert Drysdale on. He's who you got your black belt underneath. He's who your gym's underneath right now. Uh-huh. And also he's a coach in the UFC. Has some fighters underneath him. We also have Micah Gravely, who is a state representative in the Douglas and Paulding County areas, coming on the podcast. So we're gonna have some really good topics for y'all.
Yeah, so it should be interesting. Should be some fun podcasts coming up. I'll be interested to know the line of questions that we can present to some of these guests, these future guests that we're going to have here. As far as Robert Drysdale goes, I think we'll definitely be able to get him on the show. He's a fantastic guy. For people that don't know him, he's been a fantastic jiu-jitsu coach, mixed martial arts fighter in the UFC as well himself.
Yep.
Has an undefeated record in mixed martial arts. He's a phenomenal coach. He's got an outstanding program out in Las Vegas. So I think he will be a great guy to talk to on a plethora of topics, not just jiu-jitsu related. I've had some conversations with him before in the past, and just a really insightful guy, really well thought out guy. He's just to me, he's a really, really, really good, genuine guy.
Cool. Awesome. And I just want to get final thoughts from you, and I guess we'll wrap it up and go from there.
Yeah. So I'm going to backtrack all the way to where we started in the beginning. So we're starting to teach some law enforcement here at our facility, and Kennesaw Police Department. Anybody that's familiar with Cobb County or Kennesaw, the Kennesaw Police Department's trying to work out a program and a deal with these guys to have them do what we would call in quotes mandatory training.
Yep.
And one of the things you'd asked me earlier on, like one of the things that came out of it, and I tried to keep it brief in the beginning, but one of the things I think that came out of it was just being able to collectively, between myself being the instructor, some of my other instructor squad that's here to help these guys, as well as the officers themselves, being able to build a confidence factor, being able to reach out to the community, the community getting to see that they're taking it very serious to go outside their normal bounds, or their normal boundaries, and get training that is going to help make them safer, make the public safer. And I'm not going to say reinstall or confidence in the community and police officers. I believe that the right people support police officers, and they understand that their job's very difficult. So yeah. I don't think there's a massive lack of support for police. I think we get to see the very widely broadcast minority of people that don't have the best things to say about law enforcement.
Sure.
However, I think by and large, the majority of the public, especially where I'm at, supports law enforcement. It's a great thing to see officers getting more training. I do think that I think weapons like the one that's behind me in this picture right here, I think that's a weapon that could be utilized a little more in law enforcement. These are just my personal beliefs on it. Again, I'm not out wearing the badge myself and walking around, so I don't want to speak too much on what they should or should not be doing in those areas. But I do believe, number one, we've got to get rid of this mentality that scary stuff should be just blindly banned for some reason without having any knowledge about it. Number two, I think that trying to instill some kind of moral value or some kind of family value in our children, so that they understand there are consequences to what you do. There are authority figures that maybe you need to take a little more seriously and respect a little bit more, and not even a little bit more, a lot more. Yep. And then I think moving forward from here, we can try to provide a better community just through individually taking our expertise and doing what we can. Whether my expertise may be Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or teaching grappling to these guys, your expertise might be helping out with training courses on the other end of law enforcement with firearms and whatnot. But I think overall we need podcasts like this, which is an alternative, we'll say, to some of the standard media that you see. I think it's a great thing, so you can have a longer form conversation.
Yep.
And I think these need to be widely publicized. Joe Rogan obviously has a very successful podcast, and people that I I followed Joe Rogan, since his early days with the UFC.
Yep.
Even prior to that, when he was doing more stand up and had more, I think, of an ongoing comedy career.
Yeah.
And I was surprised to see people later on that would refer to Joe Rogan's podcast.
Yep.
Like my parents or something would say,
Yeah.
Hey, that guy Joe Rogan, and talking about his podcast or something. And those are alternative forms of media where you actually get two to three, 4, 5, sometimes people to have a real conversation that's not just being had out in the normal media.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to get some people on for us that have alternative points of view. I think it's important that we have those discussions so we can kind of put everybody's perspective out there and maybe, learn some things about each other. Another guy I follow is Colin Noir. He's a great guy, civil rights activist, huge gun nut, great dude. He does such a good job of explaining a lot of the stuff going on that I couldn't do from my perspective because I don't have his perspective for a lot of different reasons. But yeah, listening to opposing views in long form, which is part of the reason why I wanted to have Lance come on. Because a 2-minute interview on Fox News, even if, Fox News, CNN, whoever it is, it doesn't do the interview justice. You don't get a chance to actually talk about things and issues and really hash them out. And I think it's part of the problem of the world is we're so quick to jump on our news and get it so quickly and have such a little attention span that we hear a little 2-minute snippet and that's what we go with when we're kind of ignoring the facts. The good quote that my best friend, I've known him since middle school, Chad Hammond, sent me today. I wanted to kind of hit everybody with it, give them something to think about. For my final thoughts on things is George Carlin said this decades ago. Everyone's for it. Everybody's for everybody getting along and all these things in this perfect world until it's at your back door. I think we saw that today, with the mayor of Seattle. She was all for the summer of love, as she called it, until it was at her back door. And then suddenly it's not okay anymore. Something to think about. So if you're thinking about not supporting your police or supporting defunding the police or taking away these things from it, I just want you to think about that eventually it may find its way to your door. And it's going to be up to you to deal with it. You don't want the second string of police officers in there because I'm telling you right now, facts, I've gotten multiple phone calls from ex-coworkers, from ex-coworkers' wives, from people that I'm friends with whose husbands or boyfriends happen to be in law enforcement or even girlfriends that are like, hey, Eric, can you get her a job where you work or get him a job where you work? Because they want to get out of law enforcement. And these are jam up, top grain, top notch officers that are trying to walk away now because it's not worth it. I had somebody ask me this week, and I think we talked about it last time again, Eric, would you ever go back? I'm like, they could offer me $250,000 a year in full retirement. I wouldn't do it. There's no way. It's just not worth my freedom to me. And that's sad. And, if maybe if things swung back the other way, I'd feel differently. My better half would probably kill me if I ever put on a badge again. But that's how I feel about it.
Yeah, and that goes back to just the respect for law enforcement. Ultimately, we have to have someone that enforces the rules.
Yep.
Otherwise, we just have an absolute chaos society, which is no society at all.
Yep, absolutely.
And you brought up a good point when it comes to people's own front doors or their own back doors, they're going to usually feel differently about it.
100%.
I'm a huge supporter of the Second Amendment. More so than that, I'm a big time gun nut. I love close quarters stuff. I love, pistol. I'm really big into long range shooting. So these things, these tools will say that you have to help keep law and order. They're useless without actually having the laws on the books and having the enforcement of the laws. And, I'm always going to be a supporter of the Second Amendment. I'll always be a supporter. I'm a big time constitutionalist, we'll say.
Yep.
So I'm always going to be a massive supporter of anything constitutional because I truly believe that it's really nice to talk about these societies, these more libertarian societies where, government get completely out of the way so I can do whatever I want.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, that gives anyone free reign to interpret that how they choose. And you're going to have a lot of evil people that are also part of this game that we play every day outside. And they might not have the same views that you have. And you're not going to realize that this is a big thing until it comes knocking at your door, until you see the other side of it. And then you may change your mind and it'll be too late.
Yeah, and I think that's something it's important for people to understand that, if the police are gone, who else is going to be there for us? And I really want people to just kind of take that, from for what it's worth and understand all that. Wanted to give a shout out to a couple people real quick, a couple sponsors. the podcast, friends of the podcast. First and foremost, Dark Iron Labs. I'm about to share I've shared their website in the comments. Anybody that references our podcast for the next 2 weeks, they're offering 10% off any kind of supplements or anything like that. So if you like pre-workout protein, whatever like that, go to their Facebook site, direct message them, make your order. I'm about to share that page so you can see it, but it's facebook.com/Dark Iron Labs. And then obviously we're going to share the gym again. I want you to talk about it. There we go. Still new to all this. There we go. There's Dark Iron Labs right there. It's LE owned, LE and veteran owned. So obviously anytime you're a law enforcement officer or veteran, we're going to give you the same discounts. But if you do mention the podcast, when you make an order, you will get 10% off for the next 2 weeks. We normally do, or they normally do 5% off. So it's something to think about there. And then as well, I want to do, again, shout out your gym. Zenith Jiu-Jitsu, James Shook Jiu-Jitsu, Zenith Jiu-Jitsu, and Ackworth. If you can give everybody all the information, I'll call up the website for everybody.
Okay, yeah, so we're Zenith Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu here in Ackworth, Georgia. You guys can find us Googling my name, James Shook, BJJ. Anything similar to that, you're going to find 1,000 entries for us. They're going to come up. We're located at the corner of Stylesboro and Mars Hill Road. So we're striking distance of Powder Springs, Dallas, Kennesaw, Ackworth, obviously. Some Marietta will say we're pretty centrally located here in a pretty good area. We've got an awesome student body. If you guys haven't taken jiu-jitsu before, we'd love to have you come in and try it out. If you've ever thought about doing it, the biggest thing that I could say is the exact same thing that happened to me. One day I passed a jiu-jitsu studio, and I had talked about doing it forever. And then I said, you know what? I'm not going to drive by. I'm going to turn around. I'm going to go back over there. And I think I went in and signed up on day one. But once I walked in the door, I found out it was one of those things where I had thought about it. I had my apprehensions about it. You know, I was suspect of how the classes operate. I was, a little scared. I didn't know if I was going to go in there and the guys are going to beat everybody up or whatnot. And then I came in and found out it was this really awesome atmosphere. So we encourage anyone to come out if you've ever thought about doing it. If you ever thought about doing it for your kids, have them come out and try class. We've got an awesome group of people here. If you're not within distance of us, I encourage you to reach out and find a local Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu academy that's near you, and just give it a try.
Awesome.
Real quick, I want to give a shout out to Tier Defense, and that's TYR Defense in Cartersville, Georgia. Okay, so this weapon behind me is not built by Tier Defense. They did some work on it for me, some minor work on it for me, but I think the weapon that I had up here last week, I'll probably have a different one every week for a few weeks until I run out of different ones. But one of their weapons, I picked up a couple weapons from them recently. I wanted to, they actually supply a lot of duty weapons for law enforcement as well. As a matter of fact, the Kennesaw Police Department just had all their duty weapons built by these guys. So yeah, I want to give a shout out to those guys. They have an awesome program, and they build some quality stuff. They've got a lot of experience. It's a veteran ran organization, and a real good group of guys. They build extremely quality weapons, and I just want to give them a shout out because you're going to see a lot of their weapons in the background. Obviously today that one's not, but I'll have the others back in here soon, and wanted to give a shout out to those guys as they'll be working with us closely here in the future. I've been trying to work out some stuff with these guys as well. So. Nice
to know. Leo Fagan says, thanks so much for trying to make our community better. Great podcast. Keep it up. It's obviously our pleasure. Thank you for watching our podcast. If you guys have any questions or topics you want James or I to talk about, whether they're comfortable, uncomfortable, whatever the case may be, please either DM James, myself, hit us both up on the Unfiltered Truth website. We did start up an Instagram page. I'll put it in the comments. It's at Unfiltered Truth Podcast. Working on building that up a little bit, and all our YouTube links and everything else is, if you guys are watching, you know where to find us. And please pass it on to your friends. Again, reminder, the big one that's super excited that we have scheduled is July 22nd at 3 p.m. or 2 p.m. I'm sorry, that one will be a little bit earlier. From 2 to 4, we're going to have Lance LaRusso on. He is one of the attorneys for Officer Garrett Rolfe. And we'll be talking about a multitude of subjects. We'll reveal a little bit of them each week as we get closer. Don't want to tell everybody what we're going to talk about and spoil the surprise. So, again, thanks everybody for watching. I'm Eric, and obviously that's James, and we'll see you again next week.